Welcome to day 118 on the trail. We have four readings for today from John chapter 6, verses 1 through 21, Numbers 27, verses 1 through 11, the 104th Psalm, and 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 15 through 48. We begin today in Psalm 104. This psalm begins with awe and wonder surrounding God's magnificent creation. It says, "My soul, bless the Lord. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with majesty and splendor." While God may not be seen directly, the majesty and splendor of God is seen in what He has created. The universe around us, the world in which we live, all reflect the power, wisdom, and magnificence of the one who created them. As Paul wrote in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, "Ever since the creation of the world, His eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things He has made." We have had similar expressions of the wonder of God's creation in other Psalms. However, in Psalm 104, we find an emphasis on how dynamic and involved God continues to be in His creation. Look at verses 2 through 4. "Wrapped in light as a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent cloth. The one setting beams for His chambers in the waters. The one making clouds His chariot. The one walking upon the wings of the wind, using winds as His messengers, blazing fire as His servants." In the Hebrew text, we find active participles here. Wrapped, setting beams, making cloud, walking upon the wings of the wind, using winds as His messengers. These reflect a series of ongoing actions. God did not create the world and suddenly stop His creative activity. Instead, Psalm 104 reminds us that God is still here, still present, still watching, and still working. The psalmist then gives examples of God's continuing work occurring all around us, all the time. Yet, far too often, we miss these miracles. We are so distracted by the busyness of the immediate, to say nothing of our phones, computers, and social media, that we miss God's miraculous work, which is occurring all around us. So the author of Psalm 104 provides us with a few examples of God's ongoing creative majesty, creative miracles that we might just miss if we're not paying attention. Verse 14, "You cause the grass to grow for the cattle, and plants for people to use." Verse 20, "You make darkness, and it is night, when all the animals of the forest come creeping out." Verse 21, "The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God." And verse 27, "These all look to you to give them their food in due season. When you give to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground." God is still working, active, here and now. The world is not autonomous. Creation is not a self-starter. The universe itself, and all that is in it, depends always, daily, and immediately on God's attentive involvement. As long as there is life, God is here with us. And we will see the same promise in our reading today from John's Gospel. Turning now to the Gospel of John. We covered the feeding of the 5,000 in Luke chapter 9 on day 18 on the trail. So today, I'd like to take a closer look at John's account of Jesus walking on water. Notice that our story opens with Jesus not getting into the boat with the disciples. So beginning in John chapter 6, verse 16, "When evening came, His disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. Now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. John does not tell us why the disciples are crossing over the Sea of Galilee to return to Capernaum. However, it is likely that they are responding to the dangerous situation described in verse 15 following the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. As we learned in the story of the wedding at Cana, Jesus' time has not yet come. Therefore, when the crowd tries to make Jesus a king, he withdraws to be alone. And it seems the disciples decided to withdraw as well. As the disciples make their way across the sea, a storm arises. But notice how John describes the event. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. They were in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. How would Jesus come to them? Now, this is not an oversight on the part of John. Instead, recall that John emphasizes dichotomies throughout his gospel. In this case, light versus darkness. When Jesus is absent, there is darkness. And in the midst of this chaotic storm, the disciples find them engulfed in darkness. They are alone. Storms can appear suddenly in our lives as well, perhaps far too often. In the midst of the howling wind, the driving rain, and the darkness of these unwelcome circumstances, our lives can quickly plunge into darkness. But as the disciples learned that night, we are not ever alone, even when the darkness closes in. Although the disciples did not see him, Jesus was near. He had to be. Why? After rowing for miles, they finally see Jesus walking on the sea. But when they invite him into the boat, John tells us that the boat immediately reached the shore. If Jesus was indeed walking on the sea and did not suddenly appear, then he must have been nearby. He was close to them, with them, even though they could not see him. The nearness of Jesus, his presence with them in the darkness, is also captured in how Jesus responds to their fear in verse 20. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Here, "it is I," is a translation of the Greek ego eimi, literally, I am. We first heard this expression from Jesus in his conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well. As we discussed there, I am forms a direct connection with the divine name Yahweh. And as we discussed in Exodus 3, the name of God, Yahweh, carries the message, I am with you. When this name was first revealed to Moses at the burning bush, God is telling Moses that he does not need to know God's name because God will be with him when he confronts Pharaoh. There is no need for Moses to have a name to call out to because God will be there with him. In the same way, Jesus was with the disciples that night on the Sea of Galilee, surrounded by the wind and the waves. And Jesus promises to be with us as well, in the midst of the raging storms and overwhelming darkness that can arise in our lives. He is, and always will be, with us. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.